And it's a real honor to be here, and especially to see some of my colleagues here as well. Bill and I have walked the path together, as I've said, over 2 decades, and Bob and Barb Grinnell also on our team. And I travel with my colleague Thomas. We cover the globe. By the time we arrive in various cities, we look like our passport pictures, and they have no problem recognizing us. We really do. This year will be well over 200 days on the road, and that's quite exhausting. I want to thank you all, Andrew, and thank you for inviting me. I feel a little bit embarrassed by the fact that I had to slip away during the reception, and will be slipping away immediately after I speak, not because I desire to or enjoy doing that. I'd just as soon stand here and meet some of you. I seem to be, in 40 years of travel, this has never happened, but I do seem to be coming down with something. And my wife said to me on the phone, "You?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "That's never happened." I said, "I don't know whether they pushed me too much in Lima or what." And I've got such a busy day ahead. When we left Lima on Sunday, I left our room at 8 in the morning and left for the airport at 11 at night to catch a 1:10 a.m. flight on Monday to come back to Atlanta for a day. And during that whole day from 8 to 11 p.m., we were just in our hotel room for about an hour, hour and a half. We were speaking, doing Q&As. So they really push you to a point where you get worn out and you lose your sleep. Another night of sleep was gone, and I think it's just a matter of getting some rest and getting back on track. So please pardon me for that. Anybody who knows me will tell you this is not my normal pattern. I really like to especially meet folks who are doing such a noble job and a valuable job. So thank you for your understanding, and I hope the day will come where I can return and have a longer period of time. Thanks for what you stand for, what you do, how you do it. I'm amazed and I'm impressed. And one of the reasons I'm here is because I believe in what you do and commend you for it. It's a steep hill, very steep hill. When we look at all that has happened in the last few years alone, very few people would recognize the United States anymore. A few weeks ago, I was in Moscow speaking at some conferences there, large audiences. And one businessman took me out for breakfast. And he said this to me, and he said, "Ravi, for all these years, the only hope I have had for the future of the world is the United States." And it's a Russian speaking. He said, "Now I have given up that hope." And here's what he said: "They don't think rightly there anymore." This was a Russian man talking, that his hope was from here. When I think of how things have changed and how we have lost our way, and I look at this election cycle going on, as horrendous as the issues are, I said to somebody, if there's one man I would love to have been seen alive at this time, it would be Chuck Colson. You know, almost like Milton. America has need of thee, Chuck. Your work and your talks would be so welcomed at this hour. I knew him so well, and he was such an inspiration in my own life. One of the few men, actually, he pronounced my name correctly. He knew India well. My name is rightly pronounced as Ravi. Rhymes with lovey and dovey. But because it's so anglicized, they call it Ravi. Whenever I was on the phone and he would say Ravi, I knew it was Chuck. And I just honor his memory. But God raises up, as they say, God buries his workmen, but his work has to go on. So thank you for what you're doing. May God bless you. It took Wilberforce over 5 decades to be lying in his bed and hearing the word that had been accomplished. Imagine spending your whole life like that, 5 decades, and to know what he had fought for had finally the trumpet sound of victory. I do it in university campuses. Today, you know, once upon a time, you had to defend the rationality of the faith. No more. You really have to defend why we don't stand with culture in all of its choices, all of its varied ways of just messing up definitions and doing things that they want to do, and they think they can trip you up with 1 or 2 questions. So we are on the campuses doing this, and pray that God will bless and be honored. I want to talk to you a little bit about 2 kings from the Old Testament, and my text is really based on 2 Kings 21 and 22. But let me give you a little backdrop to this. It was Percy Bysshe Shelley who said, I met a traveler from an antique land who said to vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert, Near them on the sand half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that the sculptor well those passions read, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed, stamped on these lifeless things. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains round that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Nothing beside remains round that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. You can go into the desert terrain of the Middle East and see fallen statues, broken, wrinkled expressions on the faces, which the sculptor, well read, stamped on those lifeless things. Demagogues come and go, and we've got our own share of them now. We've got the dictatorial capacity inversely proportional to a real understanding of some of the subjects they deal with, and talk on religious worldviews and philosophical ideas as if they're the last word on it. And I listen to some of their statements and say, how gullible have we become? How plundered is our intellectual capacity when we can hear such untruths uttered as if they're just truisms. I think it was Chesterton who said, truth has become stranger than fiction because we have made fiction to suit ourselves. We believe fictional things now, and truth has become a foreign reality to us. And probably the most deadly thing of our time, the most cancerous thing of our time is this. We actually think when we speak to audiences that the truth matters to them. We are convinced that the truth actually matters to them. Remember when the Korean airliner was shot down by the Russians? And at that time, William Safire was engaging Vladimir Posner of Pravda, and everybody knew what had happened, and Posner was defending it. And at that point, Posner said to Safire, he said, the lights were not on that plane. That's why we shot it down. And Safire said, that is wrong. We have recovered the recording. You state that the lights were on. He says, no, you got it wrong. What we were really referring to there was two Russian pilots on either side of this Korean airliner, one telling the other that each other's lights were on. The Russian pilot saying, I can see your lights are on, you can see my light. And Safire said, can I tell you the exact wording from the recording? Posner said, go ahead. He said, the wording is, target's lights are on. Were you boys up there shooting each other down? And so the plane is blown to smithereens, and bodies falling from the sky, and relatives and loved ones in Seoul waiting for their loved ones who are never going to come. Pravda, ironically, means truth. They've learned to live with lies so much, and we are now becoming so comfortable with it, so comfortable with it. We do this in demagogic ways. Let me tell you a staggering story. It's true. Two young Islamic brothers, friends, who renounced their faith and became atheists. In one of the countries I shall leave unnamed, where it was told to us by a very trusted source, that these boys had become atheists and were engaging a mullah. And as they were engaging him, one of the fellows worded it unwisely. He said to the imam or the sheikh or whoever it was, he said, tell me one thing that ISIS is doing that the Prophet himself did not do. And the sheikh was stunned by the question. Next day, that man and his family paid with their lives as their home was stormed and brutally murdered. That is the only answer that some worldviews have when they do not want to deal with the truth. This is the kind of society we now live in. Here we are silenced. We are told we cannot really speak on issues that are so critical and so defining. Take a look at these two kings, and let me tell you what exactly happened with the first one. Manasseh was a young boy and reigned for 55 years. When he became king, he repudiated the faith of his father, Hezekiah, who had ushered in the greatest revival. Hezekiah had brought in the greatest revival the nation had experienced. And so Manasseh comes on the scene, and he makes three choices. He chooses to repudiate the faith of his father and all the centuries of belief that they had. He turned his back upon the living God and led a reaction against his father's reformation. When you do that, two things necessarily follow. The second is this: it accelerated the development of heathenism. It accelerated the development of heathenism. Nature abhors a vacuum. The tragedy of disbelieving in God, says Chesterton, is not that a person ends up believing in nothing. Alas, it is much worse. He ends up believing in anything. And so the incursion of paganism came on under Manasseh's rule. He repudiated the faith of his fathers, accelerated the development of heathenism, and thirdly, instituted a bitter persecution of the prophets. When you go to the book of Hebrews, you'd see in chapters 11 and 12 how the righteous were persecuted. And it refers to one of them: they were sawn asunder. The writer to the book of Hebrews is referring to Isaiah, who hid inside the trunk of a tree, running from the sword of Manasseh. And Manasseh found out about that and told them to cut the tree down as his body was severed from its midsection. This man who told us about the virgin birth, this man who told us of the messianic glory and so on, was sawn asunder by Manasseh, and the book of Hebrews records it. Turned his back upon God, accelerated the development of heathenism, instituted a bitter persecution of the prophets. What follows from this? Three very powerful truths. Number one, it is possible for one person to lead millions into untold evil. It is possible for one person to lead millions into untold evil. Remember that. Remember, even as we go to the polls now, that one person can change the course of history and make incredible choices to change the terrain. I remember when I spoke at the Center for Geopolitical Strategy in Moscow, all of the faculty members in front of me were atheists. Somehow the general had become interested in my writings and invited me to come there. I had the privilege of later leading that general to Christ, but he'd had me there, and because I was the general's guest, I was able to get some liberties out there. And as I spoke, my wife was with me, one of my colleagues, and we were sitting a distance away from the rest of them as they were making their notes on these long rectangular tables, and we were one right at the head of it. And it was a fearsome thing as I answered questions for maybe a couple or 3 hours. The hostility was so visible, so angry. And finally, I made a comment, partially there, completed it to the general later. It was something like this: Stalin was a seminary student, and he renounced his faith in God. And when he turned his back upon God, he began the slaughter of his own people. He killed 15 million of his own fellow countrymen. And the last gesture Stalin did, according to Svetlana, as she witnessed it standing by his bedside, this man who was not a very big man, he clenched his fist towards the heavens one more time, threw his head back on the pillow, and he was gone. Paul Johnson, in his book, Modern Times, chronicles that whole episode. This is the same Stalin who told a foreign dignitary that people are like an animal. If you torture them, they will follow you for food the rest of their lives. You torture people, they will follow you for the rest of their lives. When I'd finished that 3 hours with them, you could gradually see the mood changing when I shared my own conversion to Christ at the age of 17 in India. And then they lined up. There was a pensive feeling in it all. And my wife went out first. They kissed the back of her hand, and then they held me up one after another. And the president of the institute said to me, "Mr. Zacharias, I want you to know something. I believe what you've said about God to us today is the truth. But it's very difficult to change after 70 years of believing a lie. It's very difficult to change after 70 years of believing a lie." The lie had become absorbed systemically and ideologically, so difficult for them to change. One person can change a whole culture. Number two, the reason is because most people don't know how to think for themselves. And that's why I'm so impressed with what you're doing, writing these books, writing these curriculum. Help people to think, help young people to think. They want to think. They want to process. My 5-year-old grandson, Jude, he's an amazing little boy. I don't know where he gets his vocabulary from, but he one day is sitting at having dinner with the family, this tiny little guy, legs dangling up below his chair, and he looks at me and says, "Papa, what is the meaning of sophomoric?" I said, "What? What is the meaning of sophomoric?" This is the same boy who, when he was about 3.5, and his mother Naomi lost her car keys, couldn't find it, and she slaps her forehead and says, "I must be losing my mind." Jude looks at her and says, "Mommy, whatever you do, don't ever lose your heart, because I'm in there." Out of the mouths of babes you have ordained praise. Teach your young ones. Tell them the stories. Instruct them. Build the argument. Illustrate it. Ground it in application. We need to learn how to think. We don't think properly anymore. You walk onto a university campus, and some of you may have seen the YouTube clip on our website. This guy stands up at one of the major universities here, and he tells me, "What are you guys worried about relativism, you know? Why are you so afraid of relativism? It's okay." So I said to him, "Do you lock your doors at night?" He just stared at me. He said, "Yes." I said, "What are you afraid of? Are you afraid of the absolutists in your neighborhood, or the relativists are going to come and storm through your doors?" And then you know what he said? He said, "Look, we worry so much about absolutes. Look at China. It's been such a peaceful country. They don't have the theistic framework that we do. And look at all the peace with which this is a graduate student at a prestigious university." I thought, if I were the university president, I'd call this boy in and tell him to leave and go and get his papers from somewhere else. And I reminded him of what had happened with nearly 60-some million being obliterated under the rule of from the 1900s and so on. One person can change history because most people don't know how to think. Most people don't know how to think this election through. You listen to some of the arguments and I say, where did that come from? And finally I say to you, the biggest price we pay is in our children and what we do when we fail to instruct them. That is the price we pay. What happened in Manasseh's time? They were taken to the arms of Moloch and into the flaming arms of Moloch and burned in the night. Here's what it says. Nighttime seems to have been the special time for these awful immolations. The yells of the children bound to the altars are rolling into the fire from the brazen arms of the idol. The shouts and hymns of the frantic crowds, and the wild tumult of drums and shrill instruments by which the cries of the victims were sought to be drowned, rose in awful discordance over the city, forming with the whole scene visible from the walls by the glow of the furnaces and flames, such an ideal of transcendent horror that the name of the valley became then and still continues to this very day in the form of Gehenna, the usual word for hell. The valley of Hinnom got its name under Manasseh, when the babies were taken and thrown into the flaming arms of the idols, and you'd see the amber-colored sky, and the drums would drown out the screams of the mother or the baby, and people said, this is what hell must be like, and they call it Gehenna, Gehinnom, the place of hell. This very day you can see the same place. It happened in the time of Manasseh. Finally he repented, but he had already taken the country in a sad and a sorry direction. As we see our culture, and as we see them moving in so many different directions, I ask you this question: what are we doing with our children? How are we instructing them? How are we teaching them? Manasseh led them all the way to darkness and gloom and destroyed the next generation. After him came his son for 2 months, and then came Josiah. And here's what we read about Josiah. At the age of 8, he started to seek after the Lord, especially getting deeper into it. He came to the reigns at age of 8. At 16, he started to seek after God. At 20, he began to cleanse Jerusalem. At age 26, he began to cleanse the temple and ushered in the great Reformation of that time. You see, he was a little boy. He was a little boy, to aged 8, entrusted with this. Young people and children can be treated almost as a nation. That's what God said to Rebekah, 2 nations are in your womb. He didn't say 2 babies. You know, my daughter Naomi has 3 children, and 2 months ago was pregnant with her 4th. And she was so excited. She shared it around dinner and all of that. I was concerned because she's not very strong physically. And then about 2 weeks ago, she told us the baby was in trouble. The heart was losing its beat and becoming weaker and weaker and weaker. And finally, just before I went to Lima, the bleeding began, and within 3 days she lost the baby. Just before I left for Lima, she said, "Dad, can we have a little family service to memorialize this little one?" Do you know what her husband did, Drew? As crude as it may sound, he went through the afterbirth to look for where the little fetus may have actually lain. And sure enough, they found it with a tiny little head, the whole being almost the size of a bean. He washed that, put it into a tiny glass tube with some little twigs and some tiny little flowers. It was all of this size. She bought a weeping cherry tree and planted this little test tube under the roots of this weeping cherry tree so that it would remind her of a life that was lost so soon. It gave me the glimpse into the heart of a mother that was absolutely incredible to me. To her, she had lost her baby, albeit so tiny. What a different world it would be if every mother and dad had that kind of affection for that which was in their womb, instead of treating it as disposable garbage as they did in England, where thousands of them were taken and put into the incinerators to keep the power plants going in England. Some time back, when it was finally discovered, the health minister said, "This is not appropriate. This is not appropriate. It's savage." And so, as I see all that we have as an opportunity, and a young boy, age 8, coming to the throne, age 12, age 16 to seek after God, age 20 to cleanse his city, and age 26 to cleanse the temple. I want to talk to pastors here now, and I want to talk to leaders in the church. What happened? He found the book of the law in the house of the Lord. The book of the law was lost in the house of the Lord. It wasn't lost out there. We lost it in the place where it was intended to be proclaimed and read. If you are a leader in your church, are your people hearing the word? Are you taking them to the truths of Scripture? That is really what we need more than anything else in our time. Thy word have I hid in my heart, that I might not sin against thee. You see, Moses gave us 613 laws. David reduced them to 15. Isaiah reduced them to 11. Micah reduced them to 3, to do justice and love mercy and to walk humbly before your God. Jesus could have reduced them to 1. He did not. He reduced them to 2. He said to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Because of the first, the second follows without the first. The second is with its feet firmly planted in midair. You need that tandem of the vertical and the horizontal. And so he begins to cleanse the temple and begins to read the word to them. And there is a repentance nationwide. I want to give you a quick illustration of this and move very quickly to my closing thoughts here. Some years ago, I was in Beirut, Lebanon. My friend Sammy Dagger has done wonders in there for decades. And this was during the days where things were still so bad out there. 50,000 Syrian troops were in their city. And so here it was. He said to me, he was driving back at about 11 o'clock one night, and he saw a suitcase on the side of the road. And he told his English wife, Joy, let's go and pick up that suitcase. She said, are you crazy, Sammy? A suitcase on the side of the road here in Beirut? He said, darling, somebody has probably lost it. He said, let it remain lost to that person. If this is where they'd lost it, they're going to come back for it. But not Sammy. He goes and pats it. He says, it's full. And then he takes it home, unzips it, opens it, and it's packed every square inch with money. Nobody ever has that happen to them and they say to themselves, why me, Lord? So he sees all that money, every square inch, and as he looks at all that money stashed in there, at the bottom of it is a card, a business card, and he phones the man, and the man picks it up 11-something at night, and he says, have you lost something? The man says, have you found it? He says, yes. And he tells him what it is. He said, I'm coming right now. He said, no, it's curfew. He said, come tomorrow. So he comes the next day. He's shocked that a man returned all the money. Takes some and gives it to Sammy and says, you're a pastor, put it in your church. He says, no, we take our offering on Sundays. You come and put it into the church basket. The man came. Amazing things followed. The day I was leaving Beirut, he came to visit Sammy with his family, holding the precious reminder of what had happened there, a small Bible himself. But as he sat down, Sammy gave him a big Bible, and he said, you think you found your treasure? No, let me give you a treasure which will never be corrupted. And he gave him the word of God. And this Lebanese man, tears running down his face, wraps his arms around Sammy and says, I have never met a man like you who has a greater treasure than what the world is looking for, this treasure of God's word. Give them the book of the law. Secondly, teach them how to worship. That's what he did. 3 things happen very quickly. Builds a conviction of safety, satisfies them with the power to change, and rescues them from the tyranny of the immediate. Built a conviction of safety, satisfied them with the power to change, and rescued them from the tyranny of the immediate. I was speaking at the Pueblo Libre Church in Lima, and I reminded them when I was there 30 years ago that I'd never forget on the last night. As scores were coming to the front, a woman quite daughtery like this walking up. And so when they were at the altar and she was helped onto her knees, I walked over to her, and she says to me, in Spanish, it's translated, I am 100 years old. I don't know why it took me so long to find this truth. And you have given me this truth. I am ready to die now. I found Jesus. My regret is I didn't find him earlier. The power to change and rescuing you from the tyranny of the immediate. I close with the reminder to you, I do not know what is going to happen in the months to come and the weeks to come. I just want to say one thing to you. Whatever happens, as fearsome as it may be, God is still in control. And God will equip the church to go forward, but let us not fail to do our part. It was Margaret Thatcher who said these words, and I close with this. At the Scottish General Assembly, the truths of the Judeo-Christian tradition are infinitely precious, not only as I believe them, but because they are really true, but also because they provide the moral impulse which alone can lead to that peace for which we all long. There is little hope for democracy in the hearts of men and women in democratic societies if they cannot be touched by a call to something greater than themselves. Political structures, state institutions, collective ideals are not enough. We parliamentarians can legislate for the rule of law. You, the church, can teach the life of faith. We can legislate for the rule of law. You, the church, can teach the life of faith. Let's do that in our churches and get men and women to understand this word and build their life walking hand in hand with a living God into the future and bring lights into a dark world. You are among those lights. Thank you for giving me the honor of speaking to you tonight. God bless you.